For decades, the entire global economy has really been built on one single foundation, the United States. We're talking its currency, its markets, its power. But what really happens, when that foundation starts to show some deep structural cracks? And look, that's not just some dramatic soundbite for the cameras. It actually gets to a very real anxiety that's being talked about at the highest levels, from former presidents all the way to central bank chiefs. The message is pretty clear. The dollar's dominance is the very bedrock of American power, and for the first time in a long, long time, that bedrock is being seriously questioned. And we're not talking about some distant, maybe it will happen kind of threat. The analysis we're digging into today points to what it calls a structural collapse scenario. That's a hard landing, where the fundamental trust in the U.S. economy doesn't just bend, it completely breaks. This is all about a system that's under accelerating stress right here, right now. So the big questions are, what are these critical vulnerabilities that are pushing the whole system right to the edge? And what would that chain reaction actually look like if it all comes tumbling down? Okay, before we dive in, a quick reminder, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel, turn on notifications, and share and like my videos. And of course, this is for informational purposes only and is not investment advice. Thank you for that. Now let's break it down. All right, first up, and this is the big one, it all comes down to some simple but pretty brutal arithmetic. America's absolutely staggering and rapidly growing national debt. Just take a second and let that number sink in. Projections are showing that by March 2025, the U.S. national debt is going to rocket past $36 trillion. It's a number so huge it's almost hard to comprehend, but believe me, its impact is very, very real. Okay, but here's the kicker. It's not just the sheer size of the debt that's setting off alarm bells, it's the speed. This table shows we're adding over $2 trillion in just a matter of months. That's not a slow leak, my friends. That's a torrent, and it's creating this accelerating stress on the cost of borrowing and feeding this really dangerous spiral of higher and higher interest payments. So why does this matter for the economy on the ground? Well, it creates something called the crowding out effect. Think of it like this. The government is like a giant vacuum cleaner for money, sucking up all the available cash to fund its borrowing. What's left for everyone else? Not much. It makes it way more expensive for businesses to get loans to expand, to hire people, to innovate. It basically saps the long-term strength of the very economy that's supposed to pay all this debt back. And this leads to maybe the most dangerous part of this whole spiral. For generations, U.S. Treasury bonds were considered the safest investment on planet Earth, the risk-free asset. But with a debt path like this, global markets are starting to second-guess that idea. And when the world starts to lose faith in the safest asset, the entire global financial system gets wobbly. So you have this trust breaking down from the inside. And that plays right into our second huge vulnerability. Because this isn't just about faith accidentally being lost. We're talking about a coordinated strategic campaign by other nations to actively move away from American financial dominance. And the name for this whole movement is de-dollarization. It's exactly what it sounds like. A conscious, strategic effort by countries all over the world to untangle their economies from the U.S. dollar. And a big reason for this is how the dollar has been used as a geopolitical weapon through sanctions. And listen, this is not just talk. This is happening right now. Countries are making real moves. As you can see here, their central banks are selling off U.S. bonds to buy other things, like gold. Some are even demanding their physical gold be shipped back home from vaults in the U.S. At the same time, you've got countries striking deals to trade with each other in their own local currencies, completely bypassing the dollar, and even building brand new payment systems to compete with the US-led SWIFT network. And here's the thing you absolutely have to understand. This is so much bigger than just money. The dollar's status as the world's go-to currency is what gives American sanctions their power. It's the main tool in its foreign policy toolbox. If the rest of the world can trade and bank without ever touching a dollar, that immense geopolitical leverage, it just evaporates. Okay, let's recap. We've got a massive debt problem eating away trust from the inside, and we've got a strategic push against the dollar from the outside. So what happens if these two forces collide and actually trigger a full-blown crisis? Well, that brings us right to Section 3, the global contagion. The domino effect would be unbelievably fast and just devastating. First up, the moment confidence in U.S. bonds evaporates, the entire global financial system just freezes. Why? Because those bonds are the collateral, the backing for trillions of dollars in other deals. When the collateral is suddenly seen as worthless, lending just stops. Second, with the U.S. economy in a freefall, the world's biggest consumer market vanishes overnight. That creates a massive shockwave that would plunge countless other countries into a deep recession. And third, into that chaos, into that power vacuum, you can bet that geopolitical rivals would move fast to assert their own influence. And a crisis like this would shine a massive spotlight on a huge strategic imbalance. The US is incredibly dependent on other countries for key parts, for tech, for defense components. China, on the other hand, has a near monopoly on what are called rare earth elements. These are materials that are absolutely essential for everything from your smartphone to a missile guidance system. In a crisis, that dependency becomes a weapon, opening the door to what the analysis calls geoeconomic blackmail. So what do you get when you mix all of this together? You get an economic nightmare scenario, a monster called stagflation. Just picture it. The economy is collapsing because of the financial crisis. But at the very same time, prices for everything are soaring because all the supply chains are broken. The usual fixes, like cutting or raising interest rates, are totally useless when you've got both problems hitting you at once. I know, that is a really grim picture, but it forces us to ask the final and maybe most important question of all. If this era of American economic dominance really does end, what on earth comes next? Let's dive into that in our final section, the world's next chapter. Look, a crisis of this scale doesn't just reset things, it shatters the old system. It would almost certainly push the world toward what they call a multipolar currency system, where a few different currencies share the top spot. But here's the billion-dollar question. Are any of the alternatives actually ready for prime time? And when you actually break it down, as this table does, you see the real problem. The US dollar, for all its issues, still has this deep, liquid market that nobody can match. The euro? It's a contender, for sure, but it's kind of hobbled by all the internal debt problems in the Eurozone and a lack of real political unity. And the Chinese yuan? Yeah, it's rising, but because it's so tightly controlled by the state, it just doesn't have the kind of trust that's built on transparency. Bottom line, there is no easy or obvious replacement waiting in the wings. And so, we're left with this huge, unsettling question. The system we've relied on for generations is showing profound signs of instability, but there's no clear alternative that's ready to take over. The challenge isn't just about getting through a crisis, it's about what we do after. If that foundation really does crack, is the world going to come together to build something stronger and more resilient, or will we simply descend into financial chaos?